Leather trousers.
Leather trousers. Oh.
2 pairs of gloves.
2 pairs of
and a
gloves.
scarf.
Ah.
And a full face helmet.
Oh, nice. How do you cope with a rainy day?
I have a rain suit which I put
Oh, rain suit.
put on everything.
How about the gloves? Do you?
I have plastic gloves.
Oh, really? Oh.
Usually I wear leather gloves, but if it's raining, it's plastic.
Oh, really? So it's those are waterproof. Kind of.
For the first hour,
First hour.
they're pretty good. But then, you know, the rain leaks down inside, so you can't stop that, really. But basically pretty good.
If you need one, I gave this one to Canadian hair dye gloves. That is good when it is raining, you know. Do you have
plastic gloves?
There are plastic gloves. Yeah.
I don't actually.
Oh, really?
They're like,
Not bad. I've got one. So, excuse me.
why does the Canadian guy ride a bike too?
Yeah, he showed me wet rider's gloves. Oh, and then I told him, why not use hair dye plastic gloves? Those are very useful. Oh, he said, oh, thank you. I gave him two of them. Began
For hair dyeing?
this one. You can. Not bad.
You dye your hair?
Yeah. So another Canadian, it isn't unbelievable or unnatural for the Caucasian or Westerners to dye one's hair, but
Not unbelievable. It's not so common.
it's not so common. Yeah, it's not so common. But Japanese people pay more attention to the color of the hair.
I don't.
Yeah, you should. You don't have to.
This is not
Yeah. So
grey hair.
Yeah. So Westerners' hairs matches with their skin. So maybe they don't have.
Well, Japanese doesn't.
I don't know.
I don't understand that because I think, you know, most Japanese guys, if they just had grey hair, looks okay.
Silver gray. Silver gray is rather beautiful. Silver gray is beautiful. I think so.
No problem. Salt and pepper hair.
Salt and pepper here. Oh, interesting. Salt and pepper. ごま塩ね。ごま胡椒。塩胡椒。
What we call it. Salt and pepper hair.
Maybe
It's
in
natural.
Japanese, ごま塩かな。 I checked this out today. I just glanced over. Not so difficult.
Not too difficult.
This one
I didn't want to make it too crazy difficult.
is crazy.
Well, do you ever read, for example, Newsweek or Time?
I used to when I was a student. I used to read Newsweek on Time, so-called quality magazine.
I used to dissuade my students from reading them.
Really? Why?
Because the writing is incredibly difficult,
Even
even for most foreigners, you know, for most native speakers. The level of writing is way outside what most people will ever use. They use extremely difficult vocabulary just to prove how clever they are. Half the time. I mean, completely unnecessary, I think. So I used to literally tell my students, don't read Newsweek, don't read Time.
You mean they're trying to be highbrow or...
Yeah, exactly. Because the writers at Newsweek and Time, they're all trying to win some kind of Pulitzer Prize or something. And the way that they write, they obviously spend a lot of time with the thesaurus. 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 You should know that word.
Thesaurus. You know many difficult words.
Well, I'm British.
Thesaurus.
A list of words of similar meanings.
Thesaurus. In Japanese, thesaurus. 類義語辞典。Synonym. Thesaurus. Yeah.
So I think what the writers do at Time and Newsweek, for example, they go to the thesaurus for a simple word and find the longest one they possibly can and the most obscure one, and then they use that.
Do you think that kind of reading materials are sophisticated or just highbrow or kind of
sophisticated.
Intellectual snowballs?
Well, I certainly get the feeling there's an element of intellectual snobbery.
Snobbery. Intellectual snobbery.
Because the way that they write is so far above the way that most people speak that it's ridiculous. Which is why I told my students, don't bother. You know, it's like even a normal newspaper. You know, if you try to learn English from a newspaper, you will not be speaking normal English. Because newspaper English and newspaper Japanese is not the same as the common vernacular.
Common vernacular.
So I think it's basically a waste of time. You end up learning a lot of incredibly difficult vocabulary.
Kind of jargon?
Yeah, a lot of jargon as well, but also highly obscure and largely unused and unusable vocabulary, which is it's not what communication is all about. You know, I mean, you're supposed to communicate on a level that the person that you're talking to can understand. Otherwise, you're not communicating. It's like a university professor talking to a 6-year-old in technical jargon. The 6-year-old is, has no idea what he's on about, so it's a waste of time. I like words. I mean, I really enjoy using good vocabulary. So for me to meet you and have a chance to use nice long words is a very refreshing change. Because most of the time, you know, I cannot use my vocabulary. And I enjoy using my vocabulary. But for the purposes of my job, most of the time it's impossible.
Make it plain and simple.
Keep it simple. That's what language teaching is all about.
The other Canadian who recently took the master's degree do those kind of things. Every time he make collection is simplify or make it simple, make it plain. Wow. So that's in that life. Takatori is a little bit higher.
Well, you know, you have to remember that even if you understand it, it doesn't mean that the person that you're talking to understands it. So if you want to actually communicate, there's no point using extremely difficult vocabulary. That's not communication, that's just self-aggrandizement. You know, you end up talking down to the person, and that just makes everybody a bit upset.
Kind of a pompous attitude.
Extremely. So, I think, yeah, Time and Newsweek, their writers are obviously extremely clever, very gifted writers, but for the vast majority of the population, I think that's totally out of this world.
Which reading materials do you recommend for Japanese learners of English?
I always tell my students, read something that you're interested in. Number one. Okay. Number two, try and read simple.
Simple.
Well, you know they have those graded readers.
Graded reader.
Yeah, they have in Maruzen or whatever, they have these.
Maruzen.
Kinokuniya, yeah, they have graded readers. And they have head words. What they call head words, which just means vocabulary items ranging from, I think the most difficult is about 2,000 down to about 250. So the very simple ones, you only have to know 250 words in English, and you can read it. And it's obvious. It's a kind of a cartoon book, very simple, but it's still got an interesting story. The same story can be told using 2,000 words. Obviously in more detail.
Some Japanese educator or educator of English published a book which was intended for the beginners levels of English to read or communicate with junior high school vocabulary.
That's not a bad idea. Well, I mean, especially in Japan, cartoons or manga is part of the culture in a very large way. So it seems to me that learning another language from that kind of medium must be a good idea. But the thing about the graded readers is, when you start these, you should start below your actual level, i.e. read easy, so that you don't need to use a dictionary. So, for example, 2,000 is pretty high level.
Step first or step first. United Nations,
something like that,
A or B.
I mean, 2,000 head words is, I would say, junior high school native speaker level. That's a pretty difficult read for most Japanese students. But those, there's nothing like that in Japanese. Because when I was trying to learn to read Japanese, the first book my teacher gave me was Totoro-chan.
Totoro-chan.
And it was incredibly difficult for me to read. So I almost gave up. But what I tell my students is that read something that you like and keep it short to start with. I like magazines.
How about the Peanuts book, Charles Schultz? Is it a good material?
That's okay, but some of it quite culturally specific.
Culturally specific.
if you don't understand the American culture, some of it is a bit difficult, I think. Cartoons can actually be quite difficult because they can only use a short sentence, and some of that, the hidden meanings
hidden meaning
are quite difficult. Inferences or